Hello and welcome to ED Inside, where we get you a 360-degree view of the big picture in business and economy. I am Sridhar Ramakrishnan. On the show today, it's a tightrope walk for Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee, whose budget this year must make the trade-off between growth and fiscal responsibility. With global economies not quite out of the woods, what does India Inc. want from Budget 2010? And our consulting editor Swaminathan Iyer tells you what to expect from Pranab Da on the 26th.
He, of course, will claim that it's both good for inflation and for growth, because there is no finance minister who will claim it as a trade-off. But let's face it, there is such a thing as a political cycle in budgets.
Our top story first. It's taken a year and a half, 3 stimulus packages and 4 rate cuts to get the economy back on track. In fact, last month, the Reserve Bank of India revised its GDP target for the year from 6% to 7.5%. That's the good news. The bad news is, while the economy may have bounced back, the government's finances are in a precarious position. So will this be a budget for growth or fiscal prudence? Lakshmi Subramanian finds out.
The economic engine is humming once again. Growth is back on track. The job market has picked up. Industrial output has touched a 2-decade high and consumer confidence is on the rise. That's one side of the story. On the other side, food inflation is soaring. Food prices last month were at an annual high and had risen 17.43%.
We believe that the worst is over as far as food inflation is concerned. With good crop prospects, remunerative procurement prices now being in place, and Indian prices being broadly in line with international prices, I am confident that we will soon be able to stabilize food prices.
The root of the problem lies in increased credit and money supply and a high fiscal deficit. While the RBI has sucked out some liquidity by raising reserve requirements of banks last month, the fiscal deficit remains a big concern. At an estimated 6.8% of GDP, the deficit is highest in 16 years. But why should the common man worry about a record fiscal deficit? Because it chokes public investment in big-ticket social and physical infrastructure, crowds out private investment, increases interest rates, brings down the real effective exchange rate and causes inflation. One of the main reasons for India's high deficit last year was additional subsidies, pay revisions, farm loan waivers and increased coverage of the Employment Guarantee Scheme. Subsidies accounted for the largest chunk of the government's non-planned revenue expenditure last year. Food, fertilizers and petroleum were the main items on this list. But now subsidies are threatening India's financial health.
The government subsidizes. Either the government has to increase taxes, in which case the burden falls on everybody, or the government has to cut some other expenditure, in which case again the burden falls on somebody else, or the government increases its fiscal deficit, in which case through inflation the burden falls on everybody.
By keeping the price of petroleum down, you are actually bearing a subsidy. That subsidy is causing a generalized rise in prices. If you get rid of the subsidy, there will be a rise in petroleum prices, but it will soften the generalized rise in prices. And that's a very important point.
The other point is that subsidies can also be very costly if they are poorly designed and structured and inefficiently administered. That means Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee has to necessarily back for more fiscal prudence in Budget 2010.
To strike a balance between the requirement of the economy and also the capacity of the economy to bear this level of the fiscal deficit and
So what will the minister pull out of his bag to control this deficit? To start with, many are pushing for a reduction in subsidies and a rollback of the stimulus provided over the past 1.5 years. But a rollback is tough because of the way the stimulus was structured.
If we had planned our expenditure compression earlier, we could have a much better leeway in directing the stimulus the way we wanted. Much of the increase that, so consolidation that was taken place was because of the increase in the income tax and service tax revenue.
The stimulus can be partly rolled back by reimposing duties which were lowered to stimulate demand. Between December 2008 and February last year, the service tax rate was cut from 12 to 10%. In December 2008, the government cut the SENVAT rate from 14% to 10%, and in February last year, it cut that rate by another 2 percentage points. The government could now look at unwinding these measures to contain the fiscal deficit.
The revision, the downward revision in the excise duties can be corrected. After all, we are in the process of introducing GST.
It is estimated that a 2 percentage point increase in the SENVAT could help the government garner an additional 7,000 crore rupees. But not everyone, including some cabinet ministers, agree that an across-the-board hike in rates is the best option.
The recovery is there, but it is again not uniform when you look at the various sectors. Some of the sectors have done well, responded well. Some sectors still needed some support.
Rolling back, at least partially, of SENVAT is something that probably we can expect, especially in a situation where, as we see, the inflation rate is shooting up, plus the fiscal deficit is becoming a challenge. So I would not be very surprised if there's at least a partial rollback on the fiscal stimulus, especially in terms of SENVAT.
The good news is that the government is hoping to meet and even surpass its revised target of 4 lakh crore rupees for direct tax collections because of the recovery in the past 2 quarters. In contrast, last year there was a 60,000 crore rupee shortfall in collections because of the downturn.
I think it should be better than the last year. If the corporate results are any indicator, then the corporate tax collection should be better.
The companies have experienced that their bottom lines have actually improved, partly as a result of the volume sales growing up, and also because of the squeeze in costs which they were able to effect largely on the back of the recession which happened the whole of the last year. So I think corporate spreads have improved, and that will result in more taxes.
But all that will not nearly be enough to have a significant impact on the deficit. And so the government could use disinvestment as a tool to raise money. While the finance minister made a passing reference to disinvestment in the previous budget, it seems like the cause will be pushed with more fervor this year. The government is reportedly looking to raise 30,000 crore rupees via this route in the coming year. So how much will that help its balance sheet?
The intention is not to utilize the disinvestment proceeds to meet the fiscal deficit, but to meet the commitments on the expenditure in the social sector.
And last but not the least is the much delayed 3G auction, which could fetch the government another 30,000 crore rupees. But the FM knows that the solution to the problem of fiscal deficit lies in stimulating growth, cutting subsidies and widening the tax base. The good news is that he set a target of 5.5% of GDP for fiscal deficit in 2010-11, and that seems achievable because 2 main items on the list, pay arrears and farm loan waiver, which added to the deficit, are not on the list in the next financial year.
That then sets the backdrop of what you can expect from Pranab Mukherjee's 6th budget on the 26th. But what does India Inc. want? That's coming up after this short break. Stay with us.